one approach is just to say, well, truth maker maximalism is false, or at least dubious, or um, so why should we accept it to begin with? You're asking for something that perhaps is unsupported anyway. I've got one here from Omar, if you want to.
Okay, yeah, let's see it.
He has two questions from different persons so far. How are counterfactuals of creaturely freedom an exception to truth maker maximalism?
Hey, can you click on it or not?
Actually, that's from Facebook. He's in the chapter directors group.
Okay, so read it one more time.
He says, how are CCFs, counterfactuals of creaturely freedom, an exception to truth maker maximalism? Right. So the idea is that for truth maker maximalism, for any truth, there needs to be a reference, something that makes it true. A lot of people cash this out in different ways, but for James, he seems to want there to be some concrete object that grounds the truth of counterfactuals of creaturely freedom. Molinists affirm that God knows these counterfactuals logically prior to the divine decree. So God exists at least, but obviously, since it's logically prior to the decree, there's no creatures yet. So James is asking, well, what's grounding these? What is existing to ground these truths? So there are a couple different. I mean, I'm really surprised there are so many different Molinist theologians and philosophers who have addressed this that he didn't even seem familiar with. But one approach is just to say, well, truth maker maximalism is false, or at least dubious. So why should we accept it to begin with? You're asking for something that perhaps is unsupported anyway. So that's one thing. The other thing is Dr. Craig actually gives, let's just assume that some truth maker theory is true. Well, then perhaps we can just say that what makes the truth of a counterfactual of creaturely freedom have its truth value is the state of affairs described in the proposition. So what do I mean by that? Well, take the proposition: if God were to create Peter in first century Palestine, he would freely deny Christ. So according to the disquotation principle, what grounds that truth is taking away the quotes from the proposition. The fact that were God to create Peter in first century Palestine, he would freely deny Christ. You don't need anything more than that. That is the sufficient ground for that proposition. So not only has Dr. Craig said truth maker maximalism is questionable and implausible, but even if some truth maker theory is true, we have a plausible truth maker, a ground for truth making. And obviously White was just completely unfamiliar with these approaches.
Yeah, I just like to say it this way, and maybe this is a little simplistic, but this is what I was asking Dr. White over Twitter and others. I'm basically pointing out, and I think you mentioned it, something similar, that an omnipotent God who is also omniscient knows all that he could do and everything that would happen if he did it, right? I mean, so if you're going to start with the idea that God is both omnipotent and omniscient, which I think Dr. White wants to affirm, I would hope so anyway. I mean, he's very concerned about violating God's omnipotence, it seems, when he's saying there's things that are not under God's control. I'm like, well, look, if a byproduct of being omnipotent means that God can create a free creature in the libertarian sense. So unless he wants to deny God's omnipotence and say, well, that's the one thing he can't do, he's got to affirm that God can create a libertarian free creature. And if God can do that, then it stands to reason that the free creature would make some choices that God doesn't causally determine. So,
right.
Yeah, we mentioned that earlier, to say that it's absurd and incoherent to say that God can causally determine somebody to do something freely. Is that,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.